$45 trillion.
It's a number that is, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, we throw around billions and trillions in the news these days like it's nothing, but let's be real. 45 trillion is. It's just astronomical.
Right. And the source material we're looking at argues that this figure, that 45 trillion, is the total amount of wealth drained from the Indian subcontinent.
Drained.
By the British, yeah, between 1765 and 1938.
And just to ground us here, because I think our brains kind of shut off after a certain number of zeros, how big is that really?
Well, to put it in perspective, it's roughly 17 times the current annual GDP of the entire United Kingdom.
17 times?
Yes. Not just England, the whole UK. So imagine the entire British economy today multiplied by 17. That is the scale of the transfer we're talking about.
Okay, so that really sets the stakes. But I want to get into the how of it, because usually when we learn about this period, the narrative is a bit softer.
Softer how?
It's usually framed as, like, mismanagement or benevolent neglect. The idea that the British were trying, but maybe they were just a bit clumsy about it.
Exactly. That's the standard textbook version. But the document we're diving into today, it pushes back on that hard.
Yeah.
It argues this wasn't accidental.
Right.
It wasn't just a government being bad at its job. The source calls it a scam.
A scam. That implies a very specific intent.
It does. The thesis here is that British rule was a sophisticated, multi-century economic and psychological operation, one designed to systematically dismantle a global superpower.
See, that phrasing, dismantle a global superpower, that might trip some people up. Because the other narrative is that before the British arrived, India was,
well, a bit of a mess.
yeah, disorganized, medieval, needing modernization.
That is the civilizing mission argument. But let's look at the before snapshot that the data gives us. If we go back to the early 18th century, before the East India Company really gets its claws in, India wasn't a backwater at all. It was the engine of the global economy.
What kind of numbers are we talking about here?
We're talking about 27% of global GDP.
27%. That's massive. That's about the same slice of the pie that the United States holds today.
Exactly. And for comparison, at that same time, Britain's share of global GDP was hovering around 2%.
2.
So, economically speaking, India was bigger than all of Europe combined. It was the manufacturing hub of the world.
And then we look at the after snapshot.
Right. Fast forward to 1947, when the Union Jack finally comes down. India's share of global GDP had just plummeted from that 27% down to just 3%.
From over a quarter of the world's wealth to a single digit.
And the source argues this drop wasn't bad luck. It wasn't India failing to keep up. It was a deliberate three-pronged attack.
The 3 pillars.
The destruction of industry, the rigging of the financial system, and then the psychological conditioning.
Okay, let's unpack these. Because the skeptic in me, and I'm sure in some of you listening, is asking, well, didn't the Industrial Revolution happen? Maybe Britain just invented better tech and India got left behind.
That is the most common counter-argument. They just built a better mousetrap. But the source suggests the British didn't win by competing. They won by basically breaking the other guy's legs. Let's start with shipping.
This part surprised me. We don't really hear much about Indian naval history.
We really don't, and it's a shame. The source points out that Indian shipbuilding was actually the gold standard of the time. You had shipyards churning out vessels that were technically superior to European models.
Superior how? Just, like, bigger.
Durability and design. They were using this high-quality teak. There's a stat here that an Indian-built teak ship would last for 20 years, sometimes even 50.
And a British ship.
About 12 years before it needed replacing.
So wait, if the Indian product was objectively better and lasted longer, why did the industry collapse? In a free market, the better product wins, right?
In a free market, yes. But this was not a free market. The British realized they couldn't compete on quality, so they used legislation. They passed the Navigation Acts.
Which did what exactly?
Right. It effectively banned Indian ships from the big trade routes. Decrees that said goods traveling to Britain had to be on British-made vessels. So even if you were an Indian merchant with a better, safer ship, you were legally barred from using it.
So they didn't innovate, they just outlawed the competition.
Precisely. The source says this liquidated over 100 Indian navigation companies. And just to be clear, this wasn't because India lacked a naval tradition. The source reminds us of the Chola Empire's navy reaching Indonesia, or the Marathas holding off the Portuguese. The capacity was there. The laws killed it.
And that takes us to textiles, which I think people are a bit more familiar with.
Right. In the 17th and 18th centuries, India was the clothing workshop for the world. 1 out of every 4 pieces of cloth sold globally was Indian.
The source talks about the obsession with chintz from Golconda. It was like the iPhone of the 1700s.
It was. European royalty, British aristocrats, everyone wanted Indian fabrics. They were lighter, more colorful, color-fast. British manufacturers were desperate to copy them, but they just couldn't figure out the chemistry.
So, same playbook. If you can't beat them.
Ban them, and then tax them into oblivion. The British imposed tariffs of up to 80% on Indian textiles sold in Britain.
80%? That's not a tariff, that's a blockade.
Essentially. I mean, imagine trying to run a business when your product suddenly cost almost double just to cross a border. But it wasn't just about killing the sales. The goal was to fundamentally change India's role in the global economy.
From a maker of things to a grower of things.
Exactly. The shift from manufacturer to raw material supplier. The British policies forced weavers to stop making cloth and instead just grow raw cotton.
The math on this is brutal. The source puts it so simply. Force Indians to grow cotton that sells for 1 coin, ship it to Manchester.
And then buy back the finished British shirt for 1,000 coins.
Right.
And the British economy keeps that 999 coin profit.
And for the artisans who resisted.
This is where it gets really dark. The source mentions physical violence, specifically the cutting off of the thumbs of master weavers.
Now I have to ask, is that documented? Or is that folklore? Because that sounds horrific.
It's contested by some, but there are historical accounts and company records that allude to severe corporal punishment to break the guilds. The intent was clear, to stop the skills from being cast down, a systematic erasure of knowledge.
It's heavy. But let's move to the next pillar, because this is the one I think generates the most debate today. The railways.
Ah, yes, the false gift.
You hear it all the time. Okay, colonialism was bad, but look at the trains. They connected the country.
Is the standard defense. But the source argues the railways were not a gift to India. They were a high-yield investment scheme for British capital.
How so? I mean, building a railway is expensive and risky.
Usually, yes, but not for these investors. The colonial government needed railways to move troops and raw materials, but they didn't want to pay for it. So they asked private British citizens to invest, and they offered a guaranteed 5% annual return.
Guaranteed by who?
By the Indian taxpayer.
Wait, let me get this straight. If I'm a British investor, I put money into an Indian railway. If the railway makes a profit, I get paid. If it loses money,
You still get paid.
I still get paid.
Yes. The Indian tax revenue covered your losses. For the British investor, it was literally zero risk.
That just sounds like a scam.
It actually incentivized waste. Because they were guaranteed a return regardless, there was no reason to keep costs down. The source notes that building 1 mile of railway in India cost about £18,000.
And what was the going rate in, say, the U.S. at the time?
About £2,000.
So it was inflated by almost 900%.
Yes. And that money went to British contractors, British steel mills, British engine manufacturers. Every nut, bolt, and wagon was imported from Britain. They deliberately destroyed the native Indian steel industry to make sure India had to buy from them.
The irony is just painful. They buy cheap iron ore from India, ship it to Britain, turn it into steel, and sell it back to India as rails at a huge markup.
It's the delivery system for the wealth train. And the source adds a final insult. During World War II, they actually ripped up tracks that Indians had paid for and shipped them away for the war effort.
So much for the gift.
Exactly. But, as damaging as all that was, the source argues that the real genius of the theft was financial.
Yeah, let's get to the money, because 45 trillion doesn't just vanish through shipping laws. This is about taxes and currency rigging.
Right. Let's start with taxes. The rates were just extortionate. We're looking at 50 to 80% taxes on agricultural produce.
80%? That's impossible. If you take 80% of what a farmer grows, how do they even eat?
Often they didn't. The source describes farmers being treated like wild animals, locked in cages in the sun if they couldn't pay. It mentions families forced to sell their children into slavery to cover the tax bill.
That's just horrific.
It is. But here is the mechanism that the source calls the circular theft. This is a bit complex, but it's crucial.
Okay, walk us through it.
Okay. Imagine I come into your shop to buy bread. But before I pay, I rob your cash register, take your money, and then use that same money to pay you for the bread.
So, I've lost the bread, and I haven't actually gained any money because you just paid me with my own cash.
Exactly. In a normal economy, when Britain buys Indian cotton, gold should flow from London to India. But here, the British taxed the Indian people, took that cash, and then used that same tax money to buy Indian goods for export.
So they were getting the goods for free.
Correct. The value never reached the Indian people. It was extraction disguised as trade. And to lock it all down, they used something called council bills.
Council bills. Sounds boring, but the source says this was the linchpin.
It was. So say you're a French trader. You want to buy Indian textiles. You can't just pay the Indian merchant with your gold. The British said no.
You couldn't pay directly.
No. You had to go to London first. You gave your gold to the British Crown. In exchange, they gave you a piece of paper, a council bill. You took that paper to India and gave it to the Indian merchant.
Okay, so the Indian merchant has this piece of paper. What's it worth?
He can only exchange it for rupees, printed by the colonial government. So the Indian merchant gets local paper currency. And who keeps the actual gold?
London.
London keeps 100% of the gold. All the hard currency that should have been flowing into India to build wealth and capital, it was all intercepted.
That is devilishly clever. It's an air gap for wealth.
It drained the nation. And the source puts a what if on this that really highlights the scale of the loss. It says if India had just grown at the global average, about 2% at the time, the Indian economy would have been 32 times larger in 1947 than it actually was.
32 times. That rewrites the entire history of the 20th century.
It does. But, you can't run a scam this big for this long without some level of compliance. You need to break people's spirit.
And this brings us to the psychological operation.
This is maybe the most enduring part of the legacy. The source discusses the English education system, not as a tool for enlightenment, but as one for control.
It quotes Thomas Babington Macaulay.
Yes, Macaulay was very explicit about his goals. He didn't want to educate Indians to be independent thinkers. He wanted to create a class of people who were, quote, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect.
He called them brown sepoys.
Exactly. Intermediaries. People who would help run the empire and oppress their own people because they genuinely believed the British way was the only civilized way.
The source uses an analogy here that I found really haunting. The circus lion.
It's a powerful image.
Can you walk us through it?
Sure. So imagine a wild lion cub. You take it from its mother, throw it in a pit, and you starve it. For weeks, the cub is desperate and weak. Then the ringmaster appears and throws down a piece of meat.
The abuser becomes the savior.
Right. The cub eats and starts to associate the ringmaster with survival. The cycle repeats. Eventually, you have a full-grown lion. It has the physical power to tear the ringmaster to pieces. But it doesn't.
Because it's lost the instinct to hunt.
It has lost the belief in its own power. It only knows how to follow orders. It waits for the signal. The source argues, this is what happened to the Indian psyche.
Trained to feel backward. Trained to believe that without the British, there is only chaos.
And trained to believe that their own traditions were unscientific. Which connects directly to the section on modern echoes. Because this circus lion mentality didn't just disappear in 1947.
It points to the bureaucracy, right, the way officials interact with the public.
Yes. The argument is that the modern Indian bureaucracy still often treats the public like subjects to be ruled, not citizens to be served. It's a colonial hangover.
But where it gets really interesting, and honestly a little funny in a dark way, is the intellectual theft.
Oh, the gaslighting project.
I see this on social media all the time. The source lists some great examples. Yoga Nidra, an ancient practice, is rebranded in the West as non-sleep deep rest.
Right. Suddenly it's scientific because it has a new acronym. Or pranayama becoming bee breathing.
My favorite is the Scandi scarf.
The Scandi scarf.
Yes. The dupatta, the scarf Indian women have worn for centuries, is now being sold by fashion houses as a Scandi scarf.
It's absurd, but the source says it's also malicious. It's gaslighting. Indians were told these things were primitive. Now that the West has discovered they work, they're stripped of their identity, polished up, and sold back as Western discoveries.
It's like, this isn't cool until we say it's cool.
Exactly. And speaking of controlling the narrative, the source mentions how this affects the stories India tells about itself in film. It brings up the movie Sardar Udham.
That was a striking example. It's a gritty, hard-hitting film about the Jallianwala Bagh massacre.
But the source notes it wasn't sent to the Oscars. Why? Because there was a fear, allegedly, that it might offend the British or project too much hatred.
We are still worrying about the opinion of the ringmaster.
Precisely. The source asks a very poignant question. Why haven't we seen a major blockbuster film about the engineered famines? about Winston Churchill's role in the starvation of millions in Bengal.
I mean, we have endless movies about WWII heroism. But that chapter, or 3 million people died under British administration, it's just missing.
It's missing because the narrative is still controlled. As long as the story of the benevolent empire persists, those dark chapters get left on the cutting room floor.
So how do we break the cycle? The source ends with a call to action, but it's not really about economics, is it?
No, it's about the mind. The source defines true independence not as a single event in 1947, but as a continuous process of decolonizing the mind.
It's about recognizing the scam.
It's about recognizing the system was designed for extraction, not service, and realizing that the poverty of India wasn't a natural state. The source points out that while we expect every generation to be better off than the last during the colonial era, every generation of Indians was poorer and hungrier than the one before.
That really puts the modernization argument to bed, doesn't it?
Should. But the final challenge the source leaves us with is this. As long as the circus lion waits for the ringmaster's signal, the scam continues.
We have to stop seeing our own history through the eyes of the colonizer.
Exactly.
Right.
We have to reclaim the perspective. The British didn't come to build a nation, they came to strip a gold mine. Understanding that distinction is the only way to finally close the account on that $45 trillion drain.
It's a powerful place to leave it. It really makes you rethink not just history, but the way we see the world today.
Absolutely. It's a history that is still very much alive.
Well, that is all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.